project, we are going to create this sort of odd assemblage of 3D shapes, basically as an exercise in extruding. There actually is no sweeping involved in this, although there can be. So an exercise in extruding and working with different views, and in just sort of generally getting you used to working in 3D rather than 2D. So the first thing you want to do is to, and I should just say, obviously you should put your own name here, not Bart, but I digress. So what we want to do is open up Vectorworks. And we are, the first thing, to make sure that we're all working in Spotlight workspace. It might not make any difference for this particular project, but in general, you want to make sure that you're always working in Spotlight, just because it has tools that the other workspaces don't have. The first thing we want to do is set our scale. We're going to be working in 1/4 inch scale for this project, so you want to set your layer scale to be 1/4 inch. If you don't have the layer scale available here, you might need to make sure that you turn it on here, layer scale. So we're going to be working in 1/4 inch. It's always a good idea to set up layers and classes and things at the beginning of a project. So I'm going to open up my navigation palette here. We're only going to have one design layer, but we're going to go ahead and create different classes for the different objects in this project. The reason for this is this. If you remember in the last video, I showed you the plans for the unexpected guest set, where all of the various 2D plans, the ground plan, the section, the elevations, those were all generated from the 3D plan. That's only possible if you've been smart about classing different objects in their own classes as you're building. That way you can turn off and turn on different objects that may be in the way of other objects when you go to create a 2D plan from the 3D model, which is something we're going to be doing later in the semester, but you should just get used to now, making sure to class things properly as you're going along. So we're going to create a couple of different classes. And if you remember, when you first open a file, there are always two classes that are created automatically. Those are the none class and the dimension class. So we're also going to create a floor class. And you can just leave all of this the same. We're going to create a left wall class. We're going to create a right wall class. We're going to create a cube class. Going to create a sphere class. A cone class. I'm going to save this. So we've got the cone, the cube, the sphere, and I'm trying to remember what the other objects are. Cylinder. There we go. Okay, a cylinder class. And a text class. A 3D. Let's call it 3D text. Okay. You know, for this particular project, I've basically created a class for every object, and you don't necessarily need to do that frequently. I'll create a furniture class and put all the furniture in it, and a props class and put all the other props in it, and that's for this particular project, just sort of to get us used to creating classes. I'm going to go ahead and create a class for all of these objects. And here's something that we didn't talk about last semester. You can nest classes if you want to keep them more organized than this. You can do this. So I'm going to select floor and edit it and call this I'm going to put the floor and the two walls in subclasses of the same class to keep them together. So I'm going to call this I'm just going to call it walls, even though one of them is a floor. But so I'm going to do walls dash floor, and you see what happens here. And we've got walls and floor as a subset of it. So I'm going to do the same thing with the left wall. So we're going to call that walls. And of course, I could have done this to begin with. When I don't have to go back and edit it. I could have just given it these names when I originally started. Then I'm going to do the right wall. Whoops. Edit. And we'll call it walls. Okay. And then with the others, I'm going to call them props. So we'll do props. So the dash tells the program that the first word is the main grouping, and then after the dash is a sub grouping. So we're going to do props dash cube. Dash cylinder and props dash sphere. Let's get that. Okay, so you'll just see that's just a way of sort of organizing these so that there, and you also can turn them all on and all off. So if you want to turn all the props off and just have the walls turned on, you also can do them individually. So I could turn off the floor and leave on the other walls. I'll show you at the end of this project how this is going to be useful, but that's a good way to start is always to sort of create a layer and class structure for each individual project. So we're going to start there. All right, so I'm going to go back and look at our drawing here. Oh, it's turned blue. So the first thing we want to do is create this floor. So we're in 1/4 inch scale, and each one of these squares is 2 feet square. So the first thing, first of all, I'm going to make sure that I'm in top view or top plan view for what we're doing right now, and it doesn't matter. Top view looks just like, top plan view looks just like top view unless you have hybrid or 2D objects. So we're only going to be working in 3D, so there's not going to be any difference between the top plan and top. So I'm going to start in the top. The first thing I'm going to do is create a 2-foot square. So I'm going to double click on my square or rectangle tool, 24 inches square. Okay, boom. And then I'm going to duplicate that and line them up like this. Then I want to, if we go back and look here, this is in black and grayscale. So I'm going to leave one of them white. This actually is white. There's a little bit of blue or green tinted lighting going on here, which is why they don't look white, but they actually are. So I'm going to leave one of them white, and I'm going to make the other one gray. Pick a gray, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to choose 40%, I think. So the program should automatically, I should have said this earlier, but open and default to layer plane. We almost always want to be working in layer plane. If you happen to not be working in layer plane, make sure to switch it so that you're not working in screen plane. Unless I say otherwise, you always want to work in layer plane. Screen plane is kind of a specific thing. There's a I also want to talk about a visual cue thing that the Vectorworks has going on. You'll notice the background here is sort of an off-white. When you're in top plan view, the background will always be this off-white color. When you're in any of the 3D views, it will change to a blue color. So this is how, without even looking up here, you can tell the difference between if it's blue, it's top; if it's off-white, it's top plan. Any of the other 3D views will always be in blue. So they sort of give you that visual cue to let you know what's going on. So we're going to go to top view. And there are a couple different ways that can proceed here. What's going on with the floor is it's a 10 by 10 cube checkerboard. It's made up of 100 different extruded squares that are in a 10 by 10 arrangement. I can either create them all in 2D, or I can, and then extrude them together, or I can create them one in just these first two and extrude those and then copy those. So I'm either going to copy these squares, make a 10 by 10 grid and extrude that, or just extrude these two. I'm going to just extrude these two, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So I'm going to select both of them, and then to extrude, I'm going to model extrude, and I'm going to extrude them 6 inches. 6 inches, okay. And you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, now the gray has gone away. Why is that? That's because when you're working in wireframe, as soon as you, and the program will always default to wireframe, as soon as you extrude something, it will immediately turn clear, basically. You have to be working in one of the rendered modes to make sure that the color stays. So if you're ever working with a couple of different objects and some of them have been extruded and some of them haven't, you can always tell the ones that have been extruded and top view it, because the color disappears. That's how you know it's 3D. So I'm gonna check this. I'm gonna look at right isometric, and you'll see what is going on. And if I put it in OpenGL, you'll see that I now have gone from having two 2D flat squares to now I have two 3D cubes. Basically, they're not square cubes, but they're short cubes. So the reason I did the two of the, and you'll also should notice that because I had them both selected and I extruded them both at the same time, they are considered to be one thing now. However, I can ungroup them if I want to, and now there are two. They're still extruded, but they're two separate things. So I'm actually going to undo that. But whenever you have multiple things selected and you extrude them, it thinks of it as being one extrude. The other thing you should know about extruding is that after you've extruded something, you can always go back and change the 2D version of it, and it will also change the extrude. You can do that just by editing the extrusion by double-clicking on it. So I'm going to double-click here. This takes me back to the original 2D drawing, and I can change it. And then if I exit the extrude, now it is changed. So once you've extruded something, you're not locked into it. You can always go back and alter the 2D. You can also alter the 3D of something that you've created, but often if it's an extrusion and you want to change the shape of it, it's often much easier to go back and double click on it and edit the 2D shape than it is to try to edit the 3D shape. I'm going to Command Z a couple times to get back to where I was. All right. So the other thing I want to get back to here is why I did two of these rather than all 100 of them at the same time. It's because I want to create a symbol. When we're working in 3D, anytime that you have many things or even a couple multiples of things that are going to be the same, the best practice is always to create a symbol of one and then make duplicates of the symbol rather than duplicates of the of individual things. And I'm going to copy this just so I can show you why. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to create a symbol of it. Modify, create symbol. I'm going to call this base cubes. Okay, and it will ask me where I want it, and it will default to put it in the same place that you've saved the file itself, and that's usually where you want to put them. I'm going to click OK, and nothing really changes except that now, instead of, see, the original one, the one I copied, if I look at it here, it says extrude. And this one, if I look at it, it says 3D symbol. So they're essentially the same, but now this one is a symbol and this one is not. So I'm going to go back to top plan view. Top. Okay. Now I want to duplicate this and make them 10 across. So I'm going to duplicate it, Command D, drag it. So that's 2, 4, Command D 6, Command D 8, Command D 10. That should be 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Then I'm going to group that together so that I have one row. And I'm going to go ahead and put myself in OpenGL so that I can see what's going on. So now I'm going to duplicate Command D, that whole row, and put it in place here. And I'm going to, in order to create the checkerboard effect, I'm going to go ahead and flip it. So modify, where's rotate? There it is. Flip horizontal. So now I have the checkerboard effect. If I look at this, so I just hit 3 on my keypad to go into isometric. So now you can see what's going on. So I'm going to hit 0 and go back to top plan. You're going to go to OpenGL. Whenever you go to top plan, it always defaults to wireframe. So bear that in mind. So now I'm going to duplicate. I think I'm going to group this, Command G, and then I'm going to duplicate it and line it up there. So now and then I'm just going to do that again. So that's 2, 4 rows, 6, 8, 10. So there's my checkerboard floor. Then I'm going to group all of that together. 0. I'm in the habit of always going to top plan. I probably should, when I'm working in OpenGL, be in the habit of hitting 5 instead of 0 and going to top. But there's my checkerboard. So I want to say a couple things about this. I went through that fairly quickly. It's even more important in 3D than it was in 2D, that when you line things up, you really line them up. So I just Command D, I duplicated that, so that when I grab this by its corner, and I feel it click, and so that it really is lined up. I have snapping. I'm going to turn all of the snapping off so that I can line it up. So now it looks like it's lined up. You know, from out here, it looks like it's perfectly lined up. But if I zoom in, a reasonable amount, I can tell it's not. So I'm going to make sure that I have my snapping turned on and make sure that it's actually snaps to the appropriate point. The reason this is more important in 3D than it is in 2D is because you're more likely to do something with 3D file, like try to 3D print it or use it to CNC route something, and in 2D, if it looks like it's lined up, that's fine, because you're just looking at it as a picture. In 3D, if you're going to do some sort of 3D printing or other process with it, if it's not lined up, even a very tiny amount of it being off, it will screw up basically what you're trying to do. So you always want to make sure that you're absolutely lined up. So I'm going to show you the reason that I did this as symbols. Here's the deal. So I'm going to complete this one, the non-symbol version. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've got too many. All right. And we're gonna modify, rotate, flip horizontal. Don't do this. I'm just doing this to show you what's going on. And group that. I'm going to duplicate that. All right. So if I decide now I don't like this color gray, I'd rather have white and red checks. If I select this and just change it to red, well, then they all of them turn red. Well, that's not what I wanted, so that's bad. So now I'm gonna edit that. So I'm gonna go in, double click to get into edit, and then I'm gonna go into one of these groups. I'm gonna double click that to get into edit. Then I'm gonna double click this to get into edit, and I'm gonna select this red, and now I'm going to change it red. So that's what I really wanted. I'm gonna exit. Now I'm back. Well, now one of my squares is red, and now I have to do that for every single gray square. I have to go in and change it to red, which is a huge bummer because I made these out of individual groups of extruded squares. This one, on the other hand, I made out of a symbol. Remember we create. So I'm going to double click on this, then I'm going to double click here, then I'm going to double click here, and this is going to take me back to my 3D symbol. I'm going to double click here, and it's going to ask me to which part do I want to edit. Well, there is no 2D component, there's only a 3D component. I'm going to edit my 3D component. Good. Keep going back, and so I'm going to I keep double clicking. I'm going to change this to red. And I'm going to exit. And now you see what happens. Because this was all based on a symbol, when I change the symbol, it changes all of the copies of the symbol as well. So that's one of the big reasons why when you're doing something like this that has multiple copies of the same thing, it's always a good idea to create a symbol. It also takes up a little less memory to store copies of a symbol because it's all a reference. There's really, it thinks of it as there only being 2 squares and then 50 references to those 2 squares rather than 50 different sets of individual squares. So it saves a little bit of memory, but the bigger issue is it's much easier to change if you want to go back later and make an edit. So I'm just going to double click here till I get back to my symbol. I'm going to click that, change that back to gray. What was it? Was it 40? Is that sound right? Yeah, okay. And I'm going to... Alright, so now I'm going to get rid of this one. So now if I look at this in isometric, you can see that I have a floor. So there's my floor. Okay. Now something that you should keep in mind is that generally what you want to do, and I just realized I didn't do this, is when you extrude a floor, you actually want to extrude it down rather than up. And the reason for that is because that way the top of the floor is, so if I look at this from the front, let's look at this from the front. So right now, if you'll notice, if I draw a line here, the bottom of the floor is at 0. And the top of the floor is at 6 inches because it's extruded 6 inches. Usually it's, in the long run, you're better off if you extrude the floor minus 6 inches, so that way the top of the floor ends up being at 0. And so when you go to, say, put furniture in or something, it sits on top of the floor. The floor is not 6 inches up off the ground. The floor is actually at 0. So I should have, when I did this, extruded it minus 6 inches rather than just 6 inches or plus 6 inches. But because I did this as a symbol, it's relatively easy. I could also just move it down 6 inches right now, but I'm going to go back to the beginning and so I'm just going to change the extrusion from 6 to minus 6. and you notice it just moved down. And I'm going to exit the symbol and go back. Alright, and then I'm going to go back to front view, and you'll see now that the top of the floor is actually at 0. So just a tip to bear in mind is that for this project it doesn't really make any difference, but later on you're going to want to make sure that you are extruding floors in the negative direction. Alright, before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and class this. You'll notice I just was in the last class that I left. It would be better if from now on, if I was working in the none class. Why did that just disappear? It disappeared because is none turned off? Let's turn everything on. Okay. If I look at this in Object Info, this is in the Props Sphere class. It really should be in the Walls Floor class. And this is really important now that we're in 3D. For each selected group, do you want the class assignment to apply to all the subgroups of the class as opposed to only applying it to the group? In this particular case, yes. What this is saying is that not only do I want this group to be in the floor class, but I want all of the individual parts of the group to be in the floor class as well. It is possible to have a group be in one class, but to have all of the parts of the group be in another class, or even in a bunch of different classes. Sometimes that can cause sometimes that's what you want to do, and sometimes that can cause real problems if you do that. So, have the group in one class and have all the sub parts of the group in another class. That's usually not what you want. Usually what you want is this. So yes, I do want to make the class assignment apply to all of the different parts of the group. So if I say yes, alright, so now we have the floor and the floor class. So I'm going to go back to top view, to OpenGL. And now that if we look at our picture, you'll notice that the two walls and the floor are identical, basically. And we also, if I zoom in here, you'll notice that the walls are sitting on top of the floor. So they're this is actually, in reality, this wall would be floating. Here we'd have to build some sort of support to hold it up. But it's important to notice that the joint here, the wall is sitting on top of the floor. It's not sitting behind the floor. And the same thing is going on over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, or I'm going to duplicate the floor and make it into one of the walls. So I'm just going to Command D, duplicate the whole thing, get out of the way. Well, now what? So if I look at this in isometric, well, now I've got two floors. But how am I going to turn this floor into a wall? I'm going to go back to top view. Well, what I need to do is somehow rotate this wall 90 degrees up. And there are two different ways I can do this. There's a 3D rotation tool. So modify, rotate 3D. And I can tell it to rotate. Let's see if I always have to remember which one of these this is. Rotate that 90. Yeah, that didn't do it. So let's try again. Modify, rotate 3D. So it's not in the Z direction. Maybe it's in the Y direction, although I think it's in the X direction. So let's try that. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so you can see what happens there. I did that guessing a little bit on purpose, because I rarely do it that way, because I can never remember which way X, Y, and Z rotation works. What I usually do is this. If I know that I want to rotate it up towards me, if I switch to left view and I want it to rotate this way, and now I know I want it to rotate to the right. So I can just do modify rotate. I'm not doing a 3D rotation, I'm just doing a plain old rotation just like we've been doing all along. Rotate right 90 degrees. And so now I don't have to think about which axis I'm rotating around. I just put it in a view where I'm facing it, whatever view it takes, so that I can rotate it like in a 2D fashion. So if that makes sense. So if you're good at remembering which axis and working plane and the working plane is just it's the red surface that was in the last video. It's just the plane that we're working on. If you're good at spatial relations and want to figure out this stuff, then you certainly can do it that way. I find it personally much easier just to rotate it in a way that it's makes sense to me, that I can look at it and then just do either a left rotate or a right rotate. So let me back up a second and do that again, because that's kind of an important concept. So they're both flat. I want to rotate one up, so I'm going to look at it from the left or the right. I'm going to look at it from the left and then just modify rotate right. Then I'm going to grab it by this corner and put it right there, and now I'm going to look at it. Now you'll notice that lined it up. So if I'm looking at it from the left, I can line it up in this direction, but I have no way of knowing how close to me this piece is and how far away this piece is, which is why it's not necessarily lining up to that corner. I really need to look at it in front view to line it up in that direction. So I'm gonna, I just pulled it up and then I'm gonna put it back. But when you're moving an object in 3D in one plane, one direction, one view, it only moves it in that view. So in the front view, I can move it up and down, I can move it left and right, I can put it wherever I want it in that direction. But if I go back and look at it from the left, it's still lined up to this corner because it's not going to move it forwards and backwards when it's in front view. I can't move it towards me or away from me. I can only move it left and right or up and down. In the same way that if I'm in a left view, I can't move it towards me or away from me. I can only move it left and right or up and down. So you have to get used to moving these things and going to the right view in order to move things. You also can, if you want, you can work in isometric, and usually you can line things up like that. So that's also a possibility. I just find it more accurate usually to work in one of the standard views. And once again, I'm using the keyboard here to rotate around. But if you don't have the extended keyboard, you have to go up here to do this. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to top, and I have a floor and a wall, and I need to make the other wall here. So I'm just going to take this, duplicate it, Command D. Now I'm going to rotate it. Modify rotate left, and line it up, and then I'm going to hit 3, or go to right isometric and OpenGL, and there we have it. Now, if somebody hopefully will notice that the checkerboard pattern is off here. You also will probably, I hope, notice that there is no way to make it right. I can turn this and it will be right here, but then it'll be wrong here. So there's no way to make walls and a floor that are all checkerboard. Somewhere the pattern is going to be off. That's just a fluke of math. So there we have our walls and our floor. I'm going to use the flyover tool here just to show you what we've done. So we have created our first space in 3D. And put this back to right isometric. All right. And before we go on, I need to make sure to class these things. So right now, because these were copied, they're all in the floor class. So I'm going to put this in the right wall class. Floors, walls, right wall. And yes, I want to do the same thing. I want to make sure all of it is put in the same class. And then we're going to put this in the walls, left wall class. Yes. And then I'm going to go ahead and group it together. So there's our first 3D space. I'm going to go ahead and drag this down and put it right there in the center of the page. And it seems like a really good idea to save. Alright, now that we've created our space, we're going to start making the props as we're thinking of them to go in the space. So the easiest one, the one we're going to start with, is this yellow cube. So the way to make the yellow cube is just to draw a yellow rectangle and extrude it. So let's see if we can figure out where it goes. So first of all, it's 2, 4, 6, 8. It's 8 feet on a side, or 4 of these squares, and then it goes 1 square away from the front and 1 square away from the side wall. So 8 feet square at this intersection, 1 square away from the wall. So it's going to go right here. So what I'm going to do is I can go about this a couple of different ways, but I think the easiest way is to start in a known view. So I'm going to go to top view, and I'm going to use my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw this 4x4 or 8-foot square rectangle. I'm going to make it yellow. I'm going to look at this in isometric, and this is what I was talking about with the extruding minus. You'll notice that this yellow rectangle is now sitting on top of the floor. It is not sitting on top of the floor because it knows that it's a floor, and it's sitting on top of it. It's sitting on top of the floor because whenever you draw a 2D object in a 3D space, it always draws it at 0. If we look at this from the front, here's 0. So if I had left the extrusion plus 6 inches and the floor had been at 0 on the bottom, and then had been up 6 inches, when I drew this rectangle, it would have been underneath the floor, not on top of the floor. So that's why I wanted to make sure that you extruded the floor down rather than up. So now I want to extrude this up. So I select it, modify, extrude. Where is it? Model extrude, sorry, model extrude. 8 feet, 8 feet. There we go. All right, so very, very simple. This is a good time to talk about layer plane and screen plane. You'll notice even though I'm looking at this in an isometric view, when I extrude it, it went straight up because the program is set to, when it extrudes, it always extrudes things in layer plane directly up or down from the layer. It knows to go up or down. If, on the other hand, I happen to have something in screen plane, so if I draw this rectangle in screen plane, first of all, it's not going to let me. It's a little bit strange. Let me change this back. If I was working in layer plane and went to draw this rectangle, it will actually let me draw. I didn't have to go to the top view. I could actually draw it like this, and then model, extrude, and it does what you would expect, right? So I'm going to change to screen plane. I'm going to draw the rectangle. First of all, it's not going to let me do that. Because you remember, it's not going to let me draw the rectangle lined up with the floor. Because if you remember, in screen plane, it's always drawn as if we're drawing on the screen itself. And since right now this object is not lined up with the screen, really it's turned, the whole room is turned at an angle towards the screen, the rectangle looks like this. If I extrude it, model extrude 8 inches, well, something weird happened. It sort of halfway disappeared, but something even weirder actually happened. I'm going to go to front view here. Front. And you'll notice what happened is it actually extruded it at a weird angle, because when you extrude a screen plane object, it extrudes it straight towards the screen or straight back from the screen. So because the screen is turned at an angle virtually to look at this object from an angle, when it extrudes it straight towards the screen, it actually extrudes it in a very odd manner. So one of the reasons that you don't generally want to work in screen plane, you want to work usually in layer plane. Okay, so top plan. Actually, that's not really what it's to do at all. I want it to be isometric. So there we have, and here's a good example of why wireframe is sometimes not particularly useful. This looks just like a bunch of lines. You really have to go into OpenGL to see what's going on. Alright, so back to our props. So that was the first one. That was the easiest one, is the cube. So next we have a cylinder. And all of these objects are based on the same 8-foot original measurement. So the cube is 8 feet on the side, the cylinder is 8 feet in diameter, and 8 feet tall. The cone is 8 feet in diameter and 8 feet tall, and the sphere is 8 feet in diameter. So the next easiest one to draw is the cylinder, which is basically just a circle, an 8-foot circle that's then extruded up 8 feet, and it is sitting in essentially the same place as the cube. It's all, if it were a square, it would be off by one square here from the corner, but it is in fact a circle, so it's rounded off, but it's in essentially the same place diagonally across from the cube that the cube was. So a couple of different ways of doing this. I can let's try drawing this one in isometric. So I'm going to select the circle tool. I want to make sure to draw from the center, so I need to figure out where this would be. So it's going to take up, let's do this first, make sure it should be 4 by 4. It's going to take up this space, but it's circular. So I just drew that square so I could tell where to put the center of this. So I'm going to use the circle tool and draw that circle. And then I can delete my square. So you'll see it's all nicely lined up, and then I can just extrude it. Model, extrude, and you'll notice it's still set to 8 feet, because just like last semester, any of these call out windows, when you enter a value, it will retain that value until you change it. So there's the cylinder, which, let's see, it's supposed to be blue. Alright, so I could have either made the circle blue and then extruded it, or I can change it now after it's extruded. So we're going to pick a blue. And I'm going to go ahead and put this, now that I've created it, in the cylinder class. And I should have gone ahead and put the cube in the cube class. So class props cube. Alright, so now everything is in its proper class. Now we're going to go back and look and see what's next. Alright, so next we have the cone. So a couple of different ways we can go about drawing the cone. I'm going to show you both ways. So the first one is that we can use our sweep functionality that we talked about earlier. So what I will do is draw a triangle and then sweep around the triangle. So in order to do that, it's a little bit hard for me to do that, and if I try to draw a triangle and isometric, it's not really letting me. I'm trying to, because this tool is a 2D tool, it's not a 3D tool, so I would have to use a 3D polygon, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. I can show you how to do that, but so what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to pick a view. I'm going to pick a side view. So left. Oops, totally didn't want that. Let's try front. Better. Okay, so then I can use my 2D tool to draw this triangle, which you'll notice conveniently disappeared. It's still there, but whenever you draw a 2D, so I'm going to go to wireframe so you can see that it actually is there. Whenever you draw a 2D object and you're in OpenGL, it will disappear behind the 3D objects, no matter where it is, even though theoretically you would think, since it's on the screen plane, it will, and you'll notice this changed to screen aligned rather than screen plane, because I'm drawing a 2D object. We'll talk more about that later, but when you draw a 2D object in a 3D mode, it will tend to disappear. So we're going to go to a wireframe. And actually, what I should do is go to isometric so you can see what we just did. So we just drew this triangle. I'm going to go to front. Now I'm going to use my sweep. So model sweep. I'm going to leave all these the same, and it's going to sweep it around and create the cone. Very simple, very easy. It's in the kind of in the wrong place. I need to put it. It's in the middle of the wall right now. I'm going to still need to put it where it belongs, which is right there. And it should be green. All right. So that's one way of drawing the cone. There's really only one way of making the cube and one way of making the cylinder. It's drawing a square and a circle and extruding them. There are a couple different ways of making the cone. So that was the first way of making the cone, is drawing a triangle and sweeping it. Another way is to use the cone tool. So here's the cone tool. If you double click on it, and it will ask you for a radius, which is 24 inches, and it'll ask you for a height, which is 8 feet. And click OK, and alright, I did something wrong. Radius, oh, it should be 48, right? There we go. It will just create a cone for you. And then now you have to, and it will always start it at 0 unless you tell it otherwise. So once again, a good reason for extruding the floor minus, so that it ends up that you can put things on top of it. So that's, and then if I go to the top view, put it here, I'm going to go to OpenGL, and then make it green. So that's another way of making the cone. If you look at it's weird because it looks like the cone is too short. I realize that, but if you go to front view, you'll see that it is in fact the same height as everything else. It just looks like it's short. It's kind of an optical illusion. So there's the cone. Okay, our final prop here before we get to text is our red 8-foot sphere. And just like the cone, there are two ways of doing this. We can do it as a sweep, or we can just use the sphere tool. But let's do it as a sweep first. So I'm going to go to front view. I'm going to draw an 8-foot circle, radius 48. Okay. And I can't just sweep this, and I'll show you why. Model, sweep. Okay, because it creates a donut, basically, or a bagel, or a really bad inner tube. So what I need to do is sweep half of the circle. This, unless you tell it otherwise, the sweep always sweeps around the side, and normally it's the left side here. It always sweeps around the side of the object that you're sweeping. So what I'm going to have to do is use a line and cut this circle in half. Modify clip surface, delete. Now if I sweep this, model sweep, now I get basically what I expected. This is a little wonky because I probably have the settings for OpenGL set to low, so I'm going to turn them up to high, and you'll notice immediately that improved. It doesn't change the actual geometry of the object. It just changes how it displays. So I can change it back to low, and I can change it to very high. It's just about how much memory you're using and how it displays. Maybe I want to actually turn any aliasing on, but this won't really affect anything that's square, but it does affect pretty radically, obviously, on things that are round. So you may need to bump that up. All right, and then I can make that red. Then in order to put it where it belongs, it's actually, if we look at it, it's sitting, you may not be able to quite tell, but it's sitting up, because if it was sitting on the floor, it would be buried behind the other three props. So it's actually sitting in the same relative position, one square away from this wall and one square away from this wall in this corner, but it's actually sitting right on top, essentially, of the cube and the cylinder. If we were to continue a plane or put a piece of wood or something under here, you would see that it's sitting right on top of where the cylinder is. So I'm going to take this and put it right there so that it's, actually I need to line it up better than that. There we go. So it's sitting right on top there, and then it's in the right place, front to back. But then if I need to look at it from the right side, I guess, to make sure that it's sitting in the right place in relationship to the back wall or to the right wall, and of course it's not. So I'm going to move it so that it's sitting there. So then if we look at this in isometric, there it is. The other way to do this would be to, I'm going to delete that, you just use the sphere tool, double click, radius 48 inches. Okay, there it is. Turn it red, and then figure out where it is. So we're going to go to, I'm going to go to top this time. And it's back there. I'm going to grab it and move it. It should be right here, so that it's lined up. And then if I go to front, whoa, unnecessary zoom. If I go to front, you'll see that it's in a weird place, so I just need to move it up. And if I go to isometric, there we have it. So those are our four props to make sure they're classed properly. So the class of the sphere should be sphere, and the class of the, I'm sorry, obviously this is a cone, so the class should be cone, there we go, and the class of the sphere should be sphere. All right. So then the sort of the final building step here is to do the text. Once again, use your own name or whatever word you want. I don't really care. So we're gonna go to front view. And type some text. I'm gonna make it biggish. I really don't like that font. Let's just do something simple, like, actually that's not simple at all, but and then I'll just extrude it and watch what happens. Model extrude will not let me extrude it. They're illegal objects, so they've been deselected. Well, there's only one object, so it deselects it. It doesn't do. There's nothing left, and so nothing was extruded. If I can go to isometric here, you'll see that nothing was extruded. It's just flat text. All right, so here's the trick. Text has to be converted from text into shapes that look like text. Fortunately, they're in order to be extruded. Fortunately, there's a tool for that. Under text, convert text to polylines. So you just click that, and it doesn't say text anymore. It says group. If you double click on the group, you'll see that this is a polyline. So it has converted the text to shapes that look like the text. So now I should be able to extrude it, right? So let's try that. Model extrude. Still not going to work. Oh, now what's the problem? The problem now is that you can't extrude groups. You can extrude, so this is a group. It will not let me extrude it. If I ungroup it and still have all four of them selected, now I've got 4 polylines, I can totally extrude that. So it will let me extrude 4 individual objects that are selected at the same time. It just will not let me extrude those same 4 objects if I group them first. It will not extrude a group, but it will extrude collections of objects that are selected at the same time. That's just the way the program works. So model extrude, I don't know, 12 inches. Oops, a foot. It seems like it's rightish, and we're going to make that. I think it's purple in the example. So then I need to grab it and put it on top there. So there's the first step. And if I look at this in top view, you can see that it's not where it wants to be. It really, if we look here, we'll see that it's sort of diagonally across the cube. So I'm going to rotate it, modify, rotate 45 degrees to the left, and then I'm just going to drag it and put it right there. And then if I look at it in isometric, there we have it. So, and then I should assign it to the right class, props, 3D text. Okay. So now I have built my first 3D environment. I've got walls and floor and some objects, and hopefully you can see that I could make some pretty complex objects if I wanted to by making fairly simple objects and combining them together. We also can, you can extrude very complicated shapes. You can sweep complicated shapes, and then there's some other things that you can do. But for the most part, you can create a lot of. Hopefully, you can see the possibilities here of many different shapes that you could make by just creating these simple shapes. And you also hopefully got that there are a couple different ways usually to create the shapes. Some of them not so much. There's really only one way to create a cube, but which is by extruding a square. All right, so we have this. If we go back and look at this, you'll see that this one's got some lighting going on in it that makes it look a little better. So we're gonna add some lighting here. So we're gonna talk extensively about lighting later towards the end of the semester when we get into rendering and about how to put actual stage lights in and make it look like it's being lit. But there are some simpler lights that you can use in situations like this. So we're going to go to the visualization tool set here, and you'll notice that one of the things available is a light. Look at that light. Okay, so if you click on that, you get up here in the mode bar 4 different types of lights: a directional light, a point light, a spotlight, and a custom light. We're rarely going to use this. We will use the others frequently. So the directional light mode, you might guess from the picture here, is very much like the sun. So it's parallel rays of light that if you drop that in, I'm just going to randomly drop it in. There it is. So you can see now we're starting to. It immediately took on a different look. I'm going to go back to lights. Go back to the light tool. So the first is sort of is a directional light that sort of simulates the sun. And the second is a point light mode. And once again, if you guess from looking at the picture, it's very much like putting a bare bulb in the drawing. Is sort of the light radiates out from the bulb and goes everywhere. And then the spotlight mode is very similar to a theater spotlight. So we're not gonna quite go there yet. But so what you want to do is just drop a sun, and you'll notice I don't actually, I see the effects of it sort of, but I don't actually see it. I have to go to either top or top plan. I can never remember. If we go to top, probably need to be in top plan. Yeah, there it is. So the reason for this is because the reason I couldn't see it in the other modes is there's a setting in preferences, options, vectors, preferences, under display light objects only in wireframe. You can tell it to always display them only in wireframe or never display them. Usually you don't want to see, you don't want to clutter up your drawing with the light sources, so that's why it defaults to only in wireframe. So you can position it in wireframe, and then in the other render modes, the light itself doesn't show up. The effect of the light shows up, but the light itself doesn't show up. So I'm gonna go to OpenGL here, and I'm gonna actually change what we just to show you. You don't need to do this. Where was I? Tools. I'm going to tell it to always. So there it is. And I'm also going to change a setting on OpenGL options here, and tell it to use shadows. I usually don't use shadows in OpenGL because it slows down the drawing. Sometimes they're helpful, so it helps you sort of see what's going on in your drawing a little better. Usually I don't use shadows in OpenGL. Usually I reserve and turn the shadows on when I'm finished with something in one of the higher quality rendering modes, but I want you to see what's happening here. So I'm going to turn it on for right now. So the way this works is, if you watch what happens if I grab this and move it, you'll see that as the sun's moving, it's sort of like going through times of day. So I can move it, I can rotate it around. And you have to kind of wrap your brain around this. Even though the light is over here, it looks like it's coming from over here now. The thing about the sun is, the way this tool works, it doesn't matter where it is in the drawing. See, if I move this up here, nothing here changes. So the direction of this particular tool has nothing to do with where the light actually is. It only has to do with the direction the arrow is pointed. So having light, if this is here, it's exactly the same as having it here. In order to have it come from this direction, I actually have to rotate it around. I also can do not just in that direction, but if here, I also can change the elevation of the light, so it's getting lower. Now it's actually underneath. So now we're doing sunrise. and it's gone all the way around to the other side. So now we're doing sunset. So you also, whoops, hello. You also can over here, you can, if you don't want to sort of interactively change it, you can, in the object info, you can change it. The azimuth is what I was just doing, sort of sorry, it's what I was doing before. It's changing the, like, as the sun moves from east to west, basically, and the elevation is doing the sort of time of day thing. So you can do it either way. So I look at this in isometric. Right. So let's look at a little dark and dreary. If you look at this one, you'll see it's lighter. What's happening here is there are actually two different light sources on. There's one that's a primary light source and one that's a secondary light source. So what I actually did was there are two suns, even though I know, in reality that's not the way our world works. But so I'm going to duplicate this, rotate, flip horizontal. I'm going to put another sun over here, and I'm going to change its color actually to a light blue. Because if you walk outside, there actually are really two different, during the day at least, there really are two different sources. There's the sun itself, but there's also, which is the direct source, but there's also the ambient light, or the light that's sort of reflected from the atmosphere. So the sky itself lights up, one side or the other side of your face. And if the sun's lighting the left side of you, then there's the other side of you is not completely black. There's also light coming from the other direction. It's just not quite as bright, and it doesn't cast a shadow. So if we're let's look at this in isometric and in OpenGL. Well, now this looks kind of weird because there's light, there's shadows coming from multiple places, sort of, and so you have the ability to tell these lights to not cast a shadow. So I'm going to tell it to not cast a shadow. So now there's only shadow going in one direction. And it's a little overexposed because there's two suns shining at it. So I'm also going to tell this one to only be 50% bright. So there. So you can see the difference. But if I turn it off, that's a little dark and dreary. If I turn it on, I'm just sort of filling in the shadows there. This will look better if I go to one of the RenderWorks modes. I'm going to do Final Quality RenderWorks. And there we have it. So then, why did that just... Yes, I would like to re-render everything. Oh, did you see it down there? There was the teapot that I was talking about in the previous video while it was going. So in order to turn this project in, what you need to do is basically just print it. So File, Print, PDF, or if you're working on a non-Mac version, if you just File, Save As, that is totally not true. File, Export, sorry, Export as PDF. And you can save it as a PDF. Just like with 2D, this is the page. Anything that's not contained within the page will not print, so you'll want to save that. And yours should look similar to this. Feel free to change any of these colors. Obviously, change the text to something that doesn't say bird. Feel free to play with the lighting. You can alter the colors by not just changing the colors themselves, but you can actually change the color of the lights, and it will. That's kind of ugly, but let's put that back. We'll put this back the way it was too. There we go. So that's what your project should look like to turn in.